James Carter never saw himself as a family man. He loved his freedom, the late nights with friends, the ability to make decisions without thinking about anyone else. Life had always been simple for him. He had a good job, a decent apartment, and no real responsibilities. But everything changed the day his wife, Emily, told him she was pregnant. At first, James tried to hide his fear. He forced a smile, hugged Emily, and told her they would figure things out. But deep inside, panic took over. He wasn't ready to be a father. The idea of changing diapers, sleepless nights, and putting someone else's needs before his own terrified him. He convinced himself that he would fail as a dad. As the months passed, Emily became more excited about the baby, but James felt himself pulling away. He started coming home late, making excuses to avoid talking about the future. Every time Emily mentioned baby names or doctor's appointments, he felt trapped. He told himself he loved Emily, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was slipping out of his control. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch, her hand resting on her growing belly, she looked at James with so much love in her eyes. "I can't wait for us to be parents," she whispered. "This baby is going to change our lives." James forced a smile, but inside, a storm raged. Change. That word scared him more than anything. He wasn't sure he wanted his life to change. He wasn't sure he could handle it. That night, James lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Emily slept peacefully beside him. His thoughts raced. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he made mistakes and ruined his child's life? What if he ended up like his own father, distant, cold, and always too busy to care? As the fear grew stronger, an idea crept into his mind. Maybe it would be easier if he just left. If he disappeared, Emily would be upset, but she would manage. She was strong. She had always been the responsible one. Maybe she was better off without him. The thought wouldn't leave him. It played in his mind over and over again until finally he made his decision. He couldn't do this. He couldn't be a father. In the early hours of the morning, while Emily was still asleep, James quietly packed a bag. His hand shook as he zipped it up. He took one last look at his wife, the woman who had loved him despite his flaws, and felt a sting of guilt. But he convinced himself this was for the best. Without leaving a note, without saying goodbye, James walked out the door and into the night, never looking back. He thought he had escaped responsibility. He thought he was free. But James had no idea that life had a plan for him, one that would turn his world upside down in ways he never imagined. Emily woke up the next morning feeling excited. She had been dreaming about the baby, picturing tiny hands and feet, imagining the moment she would hold her child for the first time. But as she turned over in bed, expecting to see James, she found an empty space. She sat up, confused. The apartment was too quiet. Usually, she would hear James moving around, getting ready for the day. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no sound of the coffee machine, nothing at all. Emily got out of bed and walked through the apartment. "James," she called out, expecting him to be in the kitchen or the living room. But there was no response. That's when she noticed something strange. His shoes were gone. The jacket he always wore was missing from the hook by the door. A feeling of unease crept into her chest. She checked the closet. A bag was missing. Her heart pounded. Something was wrong. Emily tried to stay calm. Maybe he had gone out for an early walk. Maybe he had to run an errand. She picked up her phone and called him. The phone rang, but there was no answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Minutes passed, then hours. Emily's hands shook as she sent text after text. "Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me." No reply. By the evening, Emily could no longer ignore the truth. James was gone. He had left without a word, without a goodbye. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she wiped them away. She wasn't just thinking about herself now. She had a baby to care for. No matter how much it hurt, she had to stay strong. The next day, Emily forced herself to go to her doctor's appointment. She had no choice. This baby depended on her. Sitting in the waiting room, she felt empty. How could James do this? How could he leave when she needed him the most? When the nurse called her name, she took a deep breath and walked inside. The doctor smiled warmly. "How are you feeling today, Emily?" She wanted to say she was fine, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, she just nodded. "Let's take a look at your baby," the doctor said gently. As Emily lay down, the doctor placed the cool gel on her belly and moved the ultrasound wand over her skin. The screen flickered to life, showing the image of her child. Then the doctor's eyes widened. She moved the wand again, looking closer. Emily's heart pounded. Is something wrong? The doctor smiled, but it was a surprised smile. "Emily, you're not having just one baby." Emily stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" The doctor turned the screen toward her. "You're having 4. You're expecting quadruplets." Emily gasped, her mind spinning. 4 babies. Not 1. Not 2. 4. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't just from sadness. They were from shock, from fear, and from something she hadn't felt in hours: determination. James might have left, but she wasn't alone. She had 4 little lives growing inside her. And no matter what, she would give them the love and care they deserved. Emily sat in the doctor's office, her mind spinning. 4 babies. She could barely believe it. Just yesterday, she thought she was going to raise 1 child on her own. Now, everything had changed. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling a mix of emotions she had never experienced before. Fear, shock, overwhelming responsibility. How could she take care of 4 babies alone? Raising 1 child without James was already scary, but 4, it seemed impossible. The doctor's voice broke through her thoughts. "I know this is a lot to take in, Emily, but I want you to know that we'll be monitoring you closely. Carrying quadruplets is not easy, but with the right care, you and your babies will be just fine." Emily nodded slowly. "What do I need to do?" The doctor handed her a list of instructions: more vitamins, extra checkups, a healthy diet, and lots of rest. And most importantly, the doctor said gently, "Try to keep your stress levels low." Emily almost laughed. How could she not be stressed? James had walked out. She had no idea how she was going to afford 4 babies, and she was completely alone. But as she looked at the ultrasound screen, something inside her shifted. She wasn't alone. She had them. Her 4 tiny babies. That night, Emily sat on her bed, staring at the ultrasound picture in her hands. She traced the little shapes with her fingers, imagining their tiny faces, their little hands reaching for her. She had no idea how she would do this, but one thing was clear: she had to find a way. The next few weeks were the hardest of her life. She had to adjust her entire world to prepare for her babies. Every day felt like a battle. She was always exhausted, always worried, and always struggling to keep up. Money was a problem. She worked as much as she could, but it was never enough. She started saving every penny, cutting down on everything that wasn't necessary. No more small treats, no more buying new clothes, no more going out. Every dollar had to go toward her babies. But money wasn't the only challenge. As her belly grew, everything became harder. Walking, sleeping, even just bending down to tie her shoes. Simple tasks became exhausting. Some nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she was strong enough for this. And then there were the moments when doubt crept in. Would James ever come back? Would he even care that she was carrying 4 of his children? She pushed those thoughts away. She couldn't waste time thinking about someone who had already left. Instead, she focused on preparing for her babies. She started collecting baby clothes from thrift stores, looking for cribs on sale, and reading everything she could about raising multiples. It was overwhelming, but she kept going. Because no matter how hard it was, Emily refused to give up. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them. Emily's life had turned into a routine of exhaustion, worry, and determination. Every morning, she woke up feeling heavier than the day before. Carrying 4 babies wasn't easy. Her feet ached, her back hurt, and even the simplest tasks drained her energy. But she kept pushing forward. She had no choice. She was all her babies had. With each passing week, her belly grew, and so did the reality of what was coming. She needed a plan. She couldn't raise quadruplets in a small apartment with barely any savings. But where would she go? How would she afford everything? One afternoon, as she sat on the couch, rubbing her swollen belly, she picked up the phone and called her mother. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "I need your help." There was a long pause. Emily hadn't told her parents everything. They knew James had left, but she hadn't told them she was expecting 4 babies. She had been too afraid of their reaction. "Honey, what's wrong?" her mother asked gently. Emily took a deep breath. "I'm having quadruplets." Silence. Then her mother gasped. 4? Oh, sweetheart. Tears filled Emily's eyes. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I can't do this alone." Her mother didn't hesitate. "Come home, Emily. You don't have to do this alone. We'll figure it out together." Emily's heart swelled with relief. She had been carrying this weight by herself for too long. Maybe she didn't have to anymore. A week later, she packed her bags and moved back to her childhood home. It felt strange at first, sleeping in her old room, hearing the familiar creaks of the house she grew up in. But for the first time in months, she felt safe. Her parents immediately started helping. They set up a nursery, found baby supplies, and made sure Emily got the rest she needed. It wasn't easy. Emily still worried about money, about the future, about how she would raise 4 children without their father. But at least now, she wasn't alone. Then came the biggest scare of all. One night, as Emily lay in bed, a sharp pain shot through her belly. She gasped, gripping the sheets. This wasn't the normal discomfort she had been feeling. This was different. She sat up, breathing heavily. Then another pain hit, and another. Panic filled her chest. It was too early. She was only 7 months along. Her babies weren't ready to come yet. "Mom," she called out, her voice shaking. Her mother rushed into the room, eyes wide with fear. "Emily, what's wrong?" I think something's wrong with the babies." Within minutes, they were in the car, racing to the hospital. Emily's heart pounded as she clutched her belly. She couldn't lose them. She had fought too hard for them. Tears streamed down her face as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "Please," she prayed. "Please let my babies be okay." Emily gritted her teeth as another sharp pain shot through her belly. She could barely breathe, her hands gripping her stomach as her mother helped her into the hospital. The bright lights, the hurried footsteps of nurses, the beeping sounds of machines, it all blurred together as fear took over. A nurse rushed toward them. "She's pregnant with quadruplets," her mother said quickly. "She's in pain." Emily was immediately placed in a wheelchair and taken to a room. The pain wasn't stopping. It felt stronger, deeper. She was too early. Her babies weren't due for another 2 months. Were they coming too soon? Would they be okay? "Stay calm, Emily," a nurse said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to check on the babies right now." Emily lay back as the doctor arrived. Within seconds, cold gel was spread across her belly, and the ultrasound wand moved over her skin. She held her breath as the screen lit up with the images of her 4 little ones. The doctor's eyes narrowed in concentration. Emily's heart pounded. "Please," she whispered, "tell me they're okay." After a few tense moments, the doctor gave her a reassuring smile. "Your babies are fine, Emily, but you're experiencing preterm labor symptoms. Your body is under a lot of stress carrying 4 babies. We need to keep you on bed rest to make sure they stay inside as long as possible." Emily let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. They were okay. For now. But bed rest. How would she do that? She had so much to prepare, so much to worry about. Her mother squeezed her hand. You heard the doctor. We'll take care of everything. You just focus on keeping those babies safe. Emily had no choice but to listen. She was admitted to the hospital for observation, where she spent the next several days lying in bed, trying not to let the fear consume her. Every kick from her babies reminded her of how real this was. They were growing, moving, waiting for the right time to come into the world. But she had to keep them inside as long as possible. As the days passed, she spent her time reading baby books, watching videos about premature babies, and talking to the nurses about what to expect. Some nights she cried, wishing James was there. Even though he had left, she still wished he cared enough to check on her, to ask about his children. But she couldn't waste time thinking about him. She had to be strong. Weeks passed, and against all odds, Emily's babies stayed inside longer than the doctors expected. Her belly felt like it couldn't stretch any further. She was exhausted, uncomfortable, and ready to meet her little ones. Then one morning, as the sun streamed through the hospital window, she felt something different, a deep, powerful pressure. And then, her water broke. It was time. Emily gasped as a sudden rush of warmth spread across the hospital bed. For a moment, she froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, another wave of pain hit, stronger than anything she had felt before. She knew. It was time. Her hands trembled as she reached for the call button. Within seconds, a nurse rushed in. One look at the bed, and the nurse's eyes widened. Her water broke. She called out to the team outside. Get the doctor now. Everything happened so fast. The room filled with nurses and doctors, their voices blending together. Someone took her hand. Emily, take deep breaths. We're going to get your babies out safely. Emily nodded, trying to stay calm, but fear gripped her. This was it. After months of carrying them, protecting them, worrying for them, her 4 babies were coming into the world. The doctor moved beside her. Emily, because you're having quadruplets, we need to do an emergency C-section. We can't risk waiting. She swallowed hard and nodded. Just, please make sure they're okay. Her mother kissed her forehead. You're going to be fine, sweetheart. Your babies are going to be fine. Emily was wheeled into the operating room, bright lights shining above her. Everything felt surreal. This was supposed to happen weeks later, but life had its own plans. She felt a strange numbness spread across her body as the doctors prepared for the surgery. She couldn't feel pain, but she could feel the pressure, the movement. Her heart raced as she waited. Then she heard it. A tiny, high-pitched cry. Her breath caught in her throat. One of her babies had arrived. A few seconds later, another cry. Then another. And another. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she listened to the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, her children's cries. They're here, the doctor said gently. All 4 of them. Emily tried to lift her head, desperate to see them, but the nurses were already moving quickly, checking each baby, wrapping them in tiny blankets. She saw glimpses, tiny hands, soft pink skin, little wriggling bodies. They were so small, so fragile. One by one, the nurses brought them to her for a quick look before rushing them to the neonatal intensive care unit. They're early, but they're fighters, one nurse assured her. They'll be okay. Emily reached out, her fingers barely brushing against one of her son's tiny hands before he was taken away. She whispered through her tears, I love you. As exhaustion took over and her body grew heavy, she closed her eyes. She had done it. Her babies were here. Now she just had to fight for them more than ever. Emily woke up to the steady beep of hospital machines. Her body felt heavy, her mind foggy, but the first thought that filled her heart was her babies. They were here. She had heard their cries. But where were they now? She turned her head and saw her mother sitting beside her, eyes filled with love and concern. Mom, Emily whispered, her throat dry. Where are they? My babies? Her mother reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "They're in the NICU, sweetheart. They're small, but they're fighters. The doctors are taking good care of them." Emily tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. She winced, clutching her stomach. The C-section had left her weak, but she didn't care. She needed to see them. A nurse walked in just as she was struggling. "Emily, you need to rest," she said kindly. "Your body has been through a lot." "I need to see them," Emily said, her voice shaky but firm. The nurse hesitated, then smiled. "All right, we'll take you to them." A little while later, Emily was carefully placed in a wheelchair and wheeled into the NICU. The room was filled with tiny incubators, the soft hum of machines filling the air. Nurses moved around, monitoring the fragile newborns. Then she saw them. 4 tiny bundles, each wrapped in soft blankets, lying inside separate incubators. Wires and tubes surrounded them, their little chests rising and falling with each breath. They looked so small, so delicate. Tears blurred Emily's vision as she reached out to touch the glass. "They're beautiful," she whispered. A nurse smiled. "They're doing well for being born so early. They need help breathing, and they'll have to stay here for a while. But they're strong." Emily's heart swelled with love and fear at the same time. She had waited so long to meet them, but now they needed to fight to grow. She wanted to hold them, to take them home, but she knew it would be a long journey. One of the babies, her smallest daughter, wiggled slightly, her tiny fingers moving. Emily smiled through her tears. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mommy's here." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're going to be okay, Emily. And you're not alone. We're all here for you." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. She had come so far. She had lost so much, faced so many struggles, but she had never given up. And she wouldn't start now. Looking at her 4 tiny miracles, she made a silent promise. No matter how hard it got, she would never stop fighting for them. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's life became a routine of hospital visits, whispered prayers, and endless waiting. Every morning, she wheeled herself into the NICU, washing her hands carefully before sitting beside her 4 tiny babies. They were still so small, their fragile bodies covered in tubes and wires, but they were growing. The nurses guided her on how to care for them. At first, she could only watch as they lay in their incubators, their tiny chests rising and falling with every assisted breath. Then, little by little, she was allowed to touch them. First, just holding their hands, then gently placing them against her chest for skin-to-skin contact. The first time she held her son, her heart nearly burst with emotion. He was so light, barely more than a bundle of warmth against her skin, but she could feel his little heartbeat. A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "Mommy's here." Her mother was by her side every day, offering support and encouragement. She helped Emily through the hard moments, when one of the babies had trouble breathing, when the doctors warned her of possible complications, when exhaustion and fear threatened to break her spirit. But there were also victories. One by one, her babies started breathing on their own. Their tiny hands grew stronger, their cries a little louder. The first time she saw her smallest daughter open her eyes, Emily felt like she was witnessing a miracle. Then, one afternoon, the doctor finally gave her the words she had been longing to hear. "They're almost ready to go home." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Home. The thought both excited and terrified her. She had been waiting for this moment, but was she truly ready? Could she take care of 4 babies on her own? Her mother saw the worry in her eyes and squeezed her hand. "You've already done the hardest part, Emily. You brought them into this world, and you fought for them. You're stronger than you think." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. She had come so far. She had survived heartbreak, carried her babies through the toughest months of her life, and fought for their survival. She wouldn't doubt herself now. The day finally arrived. The nurses helped her dress each baby in soft, warm clothes, carefully placing them into their tiny car seats. Emily couldn't believe it. After everything, They were finally going home. As she held her babies close, ready to step out of the hospital, she knew her journey was just beginning. Life would not be easy. There would be sleepless nights, endless worries, and challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But as she looked at her 4 little miracles, she knew one thing for certain. She would never be alone again.